Hey everybody, welcome to my very basic guide. In this episode, I can show you the world of musically inclined elemental spirits that like to live in lamps, and grant wishes to those that rub their vessels most vigorously. As you may have guessed, these lamp-inhabiting weirdos are known as genies, and in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, they are more likely to be big magical jerks that mess with you rather than sing you classical Disney songs. If you ever wanted to rub a lamp and get shown the world on a magic carpet ride, then signing a contract with a noble genie as your patron is probably a decent option compared to many of the other Warlock patrons that are out there hungering for your soul. The Genie is a pretty interesting patron to have as it allows for some variance even within the subclass, allowing you to pick different types of genies to make a pact with that will give you access to different spell options from a variety of spell lists usually not accessible using the standard Warlock list. The Genie Patron is a subclass that specializes in giving the Warlock more spellcasting oriented support, and is full of really interesting interplay between its features and the player's creativity on how best to utilize the powers granted to them. As you shake hands with your choice of genie and finalize the arrangements of your freshly minted pact, you instantly gain access to some of the more otherworldly powers flowing into you, starting at level 1. You got a new brand of magic up your sleeve with your first otherworldly patron feature, aptly named Expanded Spell List. It is exactly what you might imagine. This is the feature that gives you, the Genie Warlock, access to new spells, and is considered a part of their Warlock spell list. However, it is important to note that these new spells are not instantly learned by the Warlock. Instead, they simply exist in the pool of spells that are available to the Warlock to unlock as they level up and gain new spells. There are 4 kinds of genies that you get to pick from, with each genie type being associated with a certain element. That also gives you a thematic idea of what kind of spells and abilities each genie can grant you. The Tao genies have the earth element, the Genie are the air genies, the Afridi are the fire genies, and lastly, the Merid are the water genies. The way the expanded spell list is broken down is that you receive a generic genie spell list expansion, regardless of what type of genie you actually chose to be your patron, and then the element that your friendly neighborhood genie is associated with will grant you an additional spell list choice, giving the Warlock 2 spells added to their spell list whenever they are able to cast them using pact magic at their respective spell levels. So let's break down the individual spell lists according to the different genie types, starting with the standard genie spell column that all genie warlocks receive. Starting at the first spell level, which warlocks can access at level 1, you get the choice to pick Detect Evil and Good. This is a really situationally useful utility spell that as a warlock you might never use, since your spell slots are really precious and potentially blowing your load trying to figure out if there is an angry outsider nearby, and then not having much else to actually fight them with can be a bit of a tough sell. Moving on to the second spell level, which warlocks get at level 3, you gain Phantasmal Force to your expanded spell list. It's a pretty fun spell that requires a bit of brain power to decide on what kind of illusion you believe to be best suited for each situation, since deception and trickery is the main purpose of Phantasmal Force, to hopefully make the enemies waste their actions. The damage is not great for a concentration spell, but it's the utility of causing the enemy to be potentially distracted by something that is not yourself or your allies that make it potent. Arriving at the third spell level, which warlocks access at level 5, you will add Create Food and Water to your warlock spell list. I suppose if you are in an extremely harsh environmental setting with no nearby civilization and there is very little vegetation to forage from, then I guess in those very specific circumstances, Create Food and Water becomes useful enough for a warlock to expend one of their 2 spell slots at level 5. But other than that specific scenario, other 3rd level spells will probably provide more for your adventuring needs. Making our way up to the 4th spell level, which warlocks get at level 7, you get the option of Phantasmal Killer added to your spell list. This is kind of like a more aggressive version of Phantasmal Force, more about raw damage and less about trickery. Phantasmal Killer is a concentration save or suck spell that gives the target the frightened condition on top of 4d10 psychic damage if they fail their wisdom saving throw. So it's quite a bit of damage over a number of rounds if the enemy keeps failing their saving throws, and Phantasmal Killer's damage also scales with the spell level that you cast it at, which means that it does benefit from the way that Warlock pact magic works. Getting all the way to the 5th spell level, which warlocks can access at level 9, you will get the chance to pick up the spell Creation. This is a spell that entirely rests on the creativity of the warlock casting it and the situation that it's being used for. But generally, the 5th spell level of Creation is going to be a fun time all around, especially for a charisma caster that can combine their wit with incredibly versatile illusion magic that may not excel at any one particular area, but can be used as a jack of all trade type of spell in a variety of circumstances. Finally, reaching the unfathomable heights of the 9th spell level, which warlocks can only access through their Mystic Arcanum feature at level 17, since their regular pact magic only goes up towards the 5th spell level. Despite being only able to cast a 9th level spell once, making a pact with a genie does come with the major perk of being able to access the all-powerful Wish spell as a warlock. Casting the Wish spell to do something beyond duplicating another spell is obviously very hard to gauge in terms of how powerful it will be, since a lot of the resulting effect will be based on what your dungeon master allows and how you worded the content of your wish. But the fact that the genie warlocks have this unique ability can be extremely rewarding, fun, and also thematically in line with what a warlock probably wants out of a pact with a genie in the first place. Now finally, moving away from the base standard genie spells that all genie warlocks receive, we go towards the genie element specific spell list expansions that give you an additional spell at each spell level, capping out at the 5th spell level. First off, we got the Dao, who are the Earth type genies, which give the Warlocks a lot of supportive and defensive spells. Starting off at the first spell level, the Dao grants the Warlock the option of picking up Sanctuary, which is a really nice defensive buff that potentially causes an enemy attacker to pick a different target or even lose their attack entirely. Sanctuary only really provides long-lasting benefits to allies that are not directly dishing out damage, because that will cause the spell to end, so, it's best to use Sanctuary on someone whose sole focus is healing or buffing, or if you already have a concentration spell set up on a previous turn before casting Sanctuary. Going towards the second spell level, the Dao gives the Warlock Spike Growth, which turns the ground into spiky Lego pieces that deals quite a bit of damage to the creature's feet. It combos quite well with forced movement abilities such as Repelling Blast or Grasp of Hadar. Arriving at the third spell level, the Dao grants the Warlock the choice of Meld into Stone. I suppose if you wanted to become one with the rocks and hide for 8 hours, then this could be what you're looking for. But as a Warlock, you probably have better things to do with your time, and merging with stones is an extremely niche application of a third level spell, although it is on brand for an Earth type Dao Genie to give you this spell as a potential option. Getting all the way to the fourth spell level, the Dao gives the Warlock Stone Shape. If you ever wanted to play Open Sesame with walls and caves, then Stone Shape can be great. It's a utility spell that provides a lot of opportunity when the caster applies their brain power to a lot of interesting scenarios, such as in preparations for a big battle, or in utility when you want to hide, escape, or infiltrate areas that has a lot of rocks. Finally, reaching the 5th spell level, the final spell that the Dao adds to the Warlock spell list is Wall of Stone. It's kind of similar to Stone Shape, except that its rules are more rigid and it affects bigger rocks, allowing you to build different types of structures using this 5th level spell. Wall of Stone will probably be used in more battle-oriented scenarios, with the creation of stony fortifications for you and your party, giving yourself some cover separating enemy formations, or just as convenient method to build some bridges over spooky chasms and fast-moving rivers. Now moving on to the Airbender Genie, we get an expanded spell list that has a stormy theme if you choose the Genie as your Genie patron type. The first spell added to your spell list if you have a Genie is Thunderwave. For a first level spell, it does some alright AoE damage, but the range is quite limited, although the pushback is nice if you are being swarmed by a ton of weaker enemies. The second spell is Gust of Wind, which is the classic way of blasting people off cliffs and high places without having your fingerprints found on them. But more realistically, you're going to probably use this second level spell as a way to knock enemies into area effect spells that your allies set up beforehand. Since Gust of Wind does require concentration to maintain, it will probably be in contest with other Warlock spells, but it's still a really cool option to get access to. The third spell is Wind Wall, which is a spell that I've never seen anyone take, and after reading its description, I can absolutely see why. It doesn't do that much damage for a third level spell, and its utility in blocking small flying units is useless because the wall is only 15 feet high, which means flyers can easily just go over the wall. But the most common use of this spell would probably be to do something like deflect arrows and bolts, but there are probably spells that can do the same thing as Wind Wall, but better. The fourth Genie spell is Greater Invisibility. The second spell level of regular invisibility is already pretty good, so it's no surprise that a souped up version that allows you to maintain your invisibility while attacking enemies is also really good. The fifth and final spell of the Genie spell list is Seeming. It's a Halloween event where you and as many friends as you can find create some really nice illusory costumes for yourselves, and it lasts for 8 hours, and it also does not cost you your concentration to maintain, so that's cool. But then everything changed when the Fire Genie attacked, as we move away from the Genie to the expanded spell list of the Ifriti. The first Ifriti spell is Burning Hands, which is a classic low level damage dealing AoE spell that does its job fairly well, especially against lower tier enemies. The second spell is Scorching Ray. The upside for Scorching Ray is that it has good synergy with spells like Hex that amplifies your damage per beam that hits the Hex target, but the downside is that Eldritch Blast kinda fills a similar niche as you level up. Going over to the third spell your spell list receives, it's going to be Fireball. Probably one of the most popular spells of D&D, and for good reason. Fireball is still probably one of the best instant AoE damage spells, and giving Warlocks access to it is a pretty nice boon from the Ifriti. The fourth spell is Fire Shield, which is an unfortunate spell to receive as a Genie Warlock since you're not really beefy enough to tank that many hits and will probably not receive enough value from the damage of Fire Shield to be worth a 4th level spell slot, especially since Armor of Agathis provides a safer spell that scales with spell level and gives you temporary hit points, increasing your survivability. The fifth and final spell of the Ifriti expanded spell list is Flame Strike. This 5th level spell is a strange one since it usually is available to clerics that don't get Fireball, making it a decent replacement, but since the Ifriti gives you Fireball, Flame Strike just gets outclassed in terms of range, area effect, and damage, using a 5th level spell slot as well. I suppose if your enemies are stacked up like a totem pole, then Flame Strike becomes kind of nice to have, but unfortunately most enemies will be spread out horizontally. Finally, reaching the last of the 4 elemental genie types, it is the cold and watery merit genie. The first of the merit spells is Fog Cloud. It's an okay way of covering your retreat and neutralizing enemy advantage on attack rolls, although you'll have to be somewhat worried of weather conditions if you don't want to accidentally waste your spell slot for nothing. The second spell is Blur, a really nice defensive option to get access to, although it is somewhat crippled due to being a concentration spell that only lasts for 1 minute. The third spell is Sleet Storm, a really specific spell that counters enemy mages trying to maintain concentration, and I suppose it is a crowd controlling type of spell spell, but using up a Warlock spell slot to make people fall prone or fail at their concentration is honestly not that good compared to other 3rd level spells. The 4th spell is Control Water, a very apt name for what the spell does. If your setting is very nautical in nature, or if you happen to be spending your day in the ocean, then this can be a really cool spell to try out. But if not, then the problem is that it usually requires a body of water to be useful at all, which is never guaranteed in many adventures. The 5th and last spell that the Mirror Genie adds to the Warlock spell list is Cone of Cold. It's an okay damage dealing spell that affects a pretty wide area, but due to the Constitution saving throw to do full damage, it becomes a rather middling spell unless you have a thing for ice sculptures. And that finally brings a close to the lengthy spell list of all 4 Genie patron types. Of course, any self-respecting Genie deserves proper housing, and this is represented by your Genie's vessel, another feature that you receive at level 1. The vessel will have to be a tiny object, but other than that, you are free to choose what the object actually is or what it looks like. Cautious Cauldron of Everything does provide some examples that you can draw inspiration from, such as the classic golden lamp that people love to rub in hopes of a giant blue spirit coming out and performing an iconic animated song. Or maybe you want something less flashy and conspicuous, and so you decide to go for something like an urn or a bottle with a cork plugging it up. Maybe you want something that the Tolkien estate might sue you for, so you go for a magic ring that whispers evil things to you in the shadows of night. It doesn't really matter what the magic vessel actually is as long as it properly represents the pact that was struck between you and your Genie. The Genie's vessel gives the Warlock 2 interesting abilities as long as you are touching the vessel. The first one is Bottled Respite, which allows you to turn yourself into a tiny smurf that is able to hide within the Genie's vessel for a number of hours equal to 2 times your proficiency bonus. It's a nice place to hang out outside as well, with great amenities such as cushions, tables, and air conditioning, a luxury that most adventurers usually go without. You can also use Bottled Respite as a pseudo bag of holding, allowing you to shrink big heavy things you are carrying and store them inside your little Genie's vessel, although you are limited to using Bottled Respite once per long rest, so you have to remember to bring stuff out when you need them. But the 2 most common usages of Bottled Respite will probably be a way to safely give yourself the opportunity to short rest, even in hostile environments, or as a way to spy on unsuspecting parties, listening in on juicy info while comfortably lounging inside a tiny nondescript object that you can easily hide. The second magical ability that the Genie's vessel gives to the Warlock that gives it a good old rub is Genie's Wrath. It's basically free damage that is equal to your proficiency bonus once during each of your turns when you land an attack roll. But the damage is determined by the type of Genie that you have. You get Bludgeoning for Dao Genies, Thunder for Genies, Fire for Afridi, and Cold for Merid. Interestingly, the Genie's vessel is actually pretty tough, with an armor class is equal to your spell save DC, and hit points equivalent to your Warlock level plus proficiency bonus. It is also immune to poison and psychic damage since it's an object. Not only that, but the vessel can be easily replaced within a 1-hour ceremony during a short or long rest, making it not that important to keep safe unless you are holding something valuable inside of your current Genie's vessel. Arriving at level 6 grants the Warlock the Elemental Gift feature, which gives the recipient of Genie power a bit of passive resistance that correlates with the elemental type that your Genie possesses, and also the extremely dynamic ability to fly. If you have an Earthy Dao Genie, then you get passive resistance to bludgeoning damage. If you have a Windy Genie, then you get thunder resistance. If you have a Hot Afridi, then that's fire resistance for your mortal flesh. And lastly, the Watery Mirror Genie gives you the Warlock Cold resistance. Permanent passive resistance is always nice to have, even when you don't think the enemy has a damage type, since it's a buff that is always on and doesn't ask anything of you in return. However, the bigger prize of Elemental Gift is that you can now soar into the sky with a flying speed of 30 feet that lasts for 10 minutes, only requiring a bonus action to activate, and doesn't cost you concentration to maintain. The amount of times you can fly is also tied to your proficiency bonus before having to long rest. So at level 6, when you receive this feature, that's essentially 30 minutes of flapping around with the time limit scaling upwards as you gain more levels. Aerial mobility is always great to have, but in addition to being able to use it multiple times per day, and that it doesn't require concentration or spell slots, is potentially a huge deal in your capabilities as an adventurer. Getting to level 10 is where the Warlock gets the chance to be more inwards looking, with the feature Sanctuary Vessel buffing the usefulness of your Genie's vessel, specifically the Bottled Respite feature. Sanctuary Vessel now allows you to shrink yourself and up to 5 friends to go and hide within your patron's vessel together. It's a really relaxing space, and everyone within the vessel gains the benefits of a short rest if they stay for only 10 minutes. In addition to the speedy power naps, anyone that chooses to heal from expending hit dice during the short rest can also add in the Warlock's proficiency bonus. This 10th level feature of Sanctuary Vessel is basically an ability that makes short rest better in order to convince your party not to always just long rest at every opportunity, so that your Warlock spell slots don't look so bad in comparison to the local wizard. And honestly, it does a pretty good job of allowing some members of the party to short rest, while the rest that doesn't need it can simply pick up the Genie's vessel and carry their miniaturized friends with them, maximizing time efficiency, and also not slowing down the party if you are playing a very short rest driven character whilst everyone else is not. Finally, reaching the golden pinnacle of your Genie based powers, you begin to remember why you decided to rub that golden lamp all those sessions ago. It was for the ability to make your dreams come true, and it kinda does at level 14 with the feature Limited Wish. You can make your wish by using your action to politely ask your patron to cast a spell for you that is 6th level or lower, and has a casting time of 1 action. The Limited Wish version of the spell can completely forego all of its components, including material components that are worth gold pieces. Not only that, but the spell can come from any spell list, making this an incredibly valuable, versatile, and just plainly powerful 14th level feature to get. The biggest restriction comes in the form of a cooldown period of 1d4 long rests before being able to use Limited Wish again, but truthfully, the ability to cast any spell that is usually expensive for nothing at all is just really good. Obviously, the limitation of the spell having a casting time of only 1 action means you will need extensive knowledge of all the spells in the game in order for Limited Wish to be truly formidable. But once you figured out a set of spells that you really wanted to try, but never had a chance to do to material component restrictions, then Limited Wish can genuinely be a dream feature that makes every other spellcaster wish they had a genie in bottle just like you. And that about does it for this very basic guide to the Genie Patron Warlock, as presented in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The Genie Warlock is a subclass that really focuses on giving the player a Warlock that is a little bit more spellcasting and utility oriented, with many of the features being really great in the hands of a player that has the imagination to really utilize the creative power that is in their corner now. So in conclusion, if you ain't never had a friend like the Genie, then maybe it's time to sign a new pact and begin a new journey. And as always, I hope that anyone who watches my stuff enjoys what I create as much as I enjoyed creating in the first place. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, goodbye for now.